I'm recording.
Okay, well, here's the deal now.
Okay.
Okay, so I've had six of my own videos and four interviews that haven't been able to be uploaded to YouTube.
Oh, really?
Okay, yeah. So there's something in the processing, something in the imagery, something in the discussion that was not allowed to go through. On my own videos, I hassled YouTube about it, appealed it, and the guy, a human, watched the video and said he saw nothing in there that should trigger the algorithm and try the processing again, and it failed again.
Huh.
And so whatever is in there was so subtle, or may just be put in at the level of the code and doesn't show up as a visual image. In any event, though, it didn't go through processing. So it's something to be advised about, right? They're also doing things like on George Webb's videos where he's got, nearly 1 million views, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million views. They'll yank those 3 weeks afterwards. And I suspect that what's going on is that they're discovering that XYZ personality is named in there, and that's the just the mere name is the issue now. You don't have to provide name, address, et cetera, et cetera. They're saying if you just identify these individuals and tie them to this subject, that's enough to cause us to get all over your case. And see, here's my thing. I'm examining all of this and trying to anticipate, trying to figure out what to do now, and trying to anticipate various directions that social order may take as a result of this. And there are certain conclusions that are still quite evident. It is a bioweapon beyond doubt. Okay, I mean, George Webb and his people have really, and all of his sources have really nailed that aspect of it down. We know all the personalities that are involved, and the nature of there's some speculation, and we could then maybe know if that speculation was accurate, some aspect of the motivation as to why these people did it, right? But here's the thing. Just today, China locked down another city of 10 million. So they've got another Wuhan developing. The people that are fleeing Wuhan, that have gotten out since the lockdown ended, are saying that it's unknown, but maybe half the population died. Okay, that would have been 7.5 million people. They just don't know. There are the stories that are coming out now that a lot of those Chinese guys have split. Like this one guy went to Vietnam, and he said that in his building, as far as he knows, he's the only one that survived. And he thinks maybe there was over 1,000 people in his building when it started, and that of his family, he's the only one that survived. And so there were 5 people that died in the apartment with him over the course of that lockdown. So absolute fucking hell, right? Like you're talking Auschwitz kind of stuff in terms of the impact on these individuals. So anyway, so China's got another city in lockdown. They obviously, from their actions, are no closer to controlling it than they were back in December when I first ID'd it as a bioweapon. Okay, so if we think about this thing in one way, well, it can get extremely discouraging. That's the problem, right? So I was reading a couple of articles on Zero Hedge that had set me off. One of them was this doctor saying, end the isolation, bring everybody back to work, accept the hit like Sweden, and we'll all be good with herd immunity. And that what's important is that people are dying now because of the shutdown in the economy, yada, 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 right? And so I understand now that the people at the top in the USA fully grasp it's a bioweapon. And they've probably known since the 29th of January. Okay. But here's their problem. They need to react as though it's a bioweapon, but they are not in a position to acknowledge that it's a bioweapon and that that's why they're reacting as they are. All right. So what we're doing now makes no sense at all if it were the flu. or a natural disease in any way, shape, or form, no matter how novel. It only makes sense at a societal level if the people at the top understands it's a bioweapon. And now they're in this conundrum that they can't do that. Yet they have these doctors coming on out expressing opinions as though it were a disease. And so now the administration, everybody has to basically counter a lot of this otherwise sound medical advice because it's not a disease, it's a bioweapon, but they can't come out and say that. And so what it comes down to is this: no doctor is an expert on treating a bioweapon infection, right? And so we're just now learning about all of this. And I'm of the opinion that the powers that be, at least at the level of the political face of things, are shocked at the devastation that this bioweapon is causing. And here's the real issue. What set me off was that article in Zero Hedge where the doctor says, if you traced all the way back, it came from The Hill. And it's an opinion piece that was put into The Hill. Why they did it, I don't know. But he's saying, let's end the lockdowns now, take the hit like Sweden, and we'll all be good. 80% of the people will have no symptoms at all to speak of. And the other 20% of those, most that are over 70 will die, some over 60, blah, 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 right? But basically it's the old people will die off, and it's the weak will die off, survival of the fittest. But what he fails to recognize is, and what I think the administration does recognize, is that those 80% that get the disease will have instantly shortened lifespans. Will have the rest of their life spent struggling against the permanent damage of the bioweapon. And they are not immune. There is no herd immunity. And this is why you see this interaction with Trump and this Fauci fellow, okay, over whether or not the disease is coming back in fall and winter. Okay, Trump, I think, is aware that it's a bioweapon, but appears to be operating, at least in that moment, with the idea that it can be turned off and that we don't have to have it come back, and it's up to us to decide to do that. And he was sort of sending a message to people in my interpretation of that particular moment, right? It was at least his intent to do that. So if it's a bioweapon, then all of these things are perhaps quite accurate. That anybody that gets it is has merely avoided serious complications and death that episode, and they will get it again.
But don't you think? I mean, this comes back to our earlier conversations because it's very difficult to live in a place where you protect yourself from it. It's everywhere, is my take, and you gotta fortify your body is your best hope. Right. Even not necessarily to beat it, but just to be able to function. Because right now I see, I mean, this is the Democrats' wet dream. Obviously, everybody relying on the government for money. For what should we, in your opinion, what should we be doing as far as should we just stay hunkered down for as long as possible? We're still going to get it at some point. Or should we kind of pinpoint people who are most susceptible, but tell everybody, hey, it's a bioweapon out there. You should continue to take your best precautions. But at the same time, we can't do this forever. And, I mean, we're all going to die anyway. What kind of system or country do we want to live in? I think it might be too late for the business economic aspects of continuing to go forward. Everything's got to be different, like you said long ago. And you had talked about in our first conversation about this back in September, before the virus even hit. You talked about technology is the thing that will help us or save us if there is anything left to be saved. Is that still your take, and what do you think we should do?
Okay, here's the thing, Guy. If I were to be, all right, so here's how we have to analyze it. There is no clear path. All right. So the reason there's no clear path is because there's no consensus view of what's going on. And because we have large, conflicting, aggregated understandings, we find ourselves at conflict within our approach to this. So under those circumstances, I see myself as an individual in a social order that is basically a dinosaur that's gotten COVID and it's going to fall over and die, and it just doesn't, it just hasn't done it yet, right? So one way for me to approach this is to say to myself, okay, as a smart individual who's capable of managing this, I can come out in 5 years when perhaps half of humanity is dead. And I can move around reasonably safely with half of humanity dead in 5 years. And if there's some point to doing so, go somewhere and do other things than I'm doing. But given the current situation continuing and our current understanding continuing, it's very possible that in 5 years' time, half of humanity would be dead. And as a result of which, the social order as we know it would be totally collapsed. And so under the circumstances then, it's all individuals as though you're in the 16, 18, 1700s, right? Something
Mad
like
Max
that.
world.
Well, no, because in Mad Max world, they congregated. In our world, we will not. You will not join a gang because that gang can get you killed because it's a fucking bioweapon, right? And so you'll recognize that it's a bioweapon all of your life. And so you will go through the rest of your life treating other humans as though they were landmines and taking, really appropriate condition. So if you run into another human on the road, you'll fire an arrow at them. And when that arrow lands in the ground, if they come any closer, that's that's true social distancing under that environment. And so that might be 50 yards. All right, which is accurate, I think, now, because they know in a store that a single cough can spread through an entire store 100 feet by 100 feet wide. And they know within the first few milliseconds of that within 23-foot circle is all contaminated. Now, there's some stuff coming out about this bioweapon that may or may not be accurate, but some of the thinking is showing up as though this is a timed bioweapon. Okay, so there's some thought that after it reaches the point where the whole humanity has less than R1, that the bioweapon itself will perish within about 70 or 80 days. So say we doubled that and say 160 days, okay, or 120 days, somewhere in there. So, we're looking at, give it 4 to 5 months after it can no longer be transmitted because there aren't enough humans close enough to each other. In which case, if that's true, then civilization could indeed start rebuilding. But as long as we're functioning under the idea that this is a disease, then what's it going to take to get us down to the level of humanity-wide less than R1? Well, that would be the death of the population, at least of about 1 billion people, to get everyone else's attention and keep them from even thinking about associating with each other, right? Mm. But here's the thing, too. At that stage, you're already going to have maybe, if they're correct, if the scientist guys are correct, at that stage, 80% of humanity would have been damaged because they would have received an episode of this and have gotten some level of damage, whether they're aware of it or not. So this is the thing. The individual that died that was within our extended family had no appreciable symptoms greater than annual allergies. He did not think he had illness. There was no indication he had fever. Okay, he just had regular allergic reaction that he gets this time of the year anyway, and then had that for 5 days. It went away, and then 4 days later, he fell over dead and when the autopsy was performed, ground glass opacities and heart damage and kidney and other. It was basic multi-organ failure, rather sudden. So, so here was an individual that fit the 80% category. They're not tabulating such individuals, right? The only reason that he will probably end up in the COVID-19 death statistics is because they were able to establish that because of him having traveled from one point to another just before he died and the circumstances under the death. So, but if it had just happened at home, they would have found him. They would have just said, slightly overweight individual dead of a heart attack at a young age, and we'll let it go at that.
What do you think about? I mean, when I look at it, China in Wuhan, obviously, first place it was discovered. Was it a more powerful strain than the rest of the world that's not experiencing, at least right now? Obviously, we're on lockdown. That's not experiencing half the population dying. What is the difference? Is it a different? Does it become weaker over time or over? What is the difference? Why didn't we turn out like Wuhan?
There's two. Okay, so there's two operating theories here at the moment. All right, the doctors and those who consider it to be a bioweapon think that it's out there mutating and that we're getting different strains, and not just 2 or 3, but 30 or 40, and some of them are highly lethal. All right, so there's a lot of questions about that sort of scenario, that there's multiple strains of it. Okay, the reason there's a lot of questions about it due to the nature of the coronavirus envelope and what it's got in it anyway. And then there's also a lot of questions about its ability to mutate as it's not a natural virus, and because it's not a natural virus, it's very large. And so in the virus's shape, if we were to look at it like horizontal, it looks like a cone, a wedge-shaped cone, a terminating cone. It's extremely large. And they're showing on some of the strains or the mutations, I think, are just bits and pieces of it not being able to be replicated within the RNA because it's so large. So follow me on this. RNA viruses have a finite limit as to how big they can become, and that's why DNA exists, okay? Because DNA can take that structure very much larger and grow things like humans. But if you're only RNA, then you can only grow little things, microvitae, viruses. Let's just call them all viruses. All right, now, once you get over a certain size in RNA, the RNA does not replicate itself because there's no referential self-check within the RNA itself. So as we have a computer program and we tell it to copy, once it's copied from one part of the disk to the other, the final act of the software is to make sure that the two copies are identical, right? Okay, and so that's what the telomeres do, sort of. On our, they aid us in not having cancer by replication without stopping. There's the other aspect of that, which is you've got to be able to replicate that gene or that genome accurately. With the RNA, I think that doesn't happen. So what I think a lot of these guys are seeing as different strains are this giant cone-shaped thing that's dropping off chunks at the end because it doesn't have a big enough referential self-check and integrity check within it. It has something in it that causes it to replicate very accurately each and every time. This right there, that tells you it's a bioweapon because the size of the genome of the gene packs within the RNA structure are such that should not happen. It should not be able to do that because almost all natural viruses are way smaller, say, less than 60% of the size of this critter. All right, so it's huge compared to regular viruses. And I think what's actually going on is that the separate strains are merely chunks dropping off the end because the referential replication check only covers the middle core of it. and it could not be capable of doing any more than that without actually having to have a DNA structure. So that's one aspect of it. All right, there may be more lethal strains developing simply because it doesn't replicate correctly. And it's not really a mutation, it's degradation. But this is what is arguing that degradation factor. If you get on the deep web and you go out and look, that degradation factor is being discussed as the as a key pointer to the possibility that this thing is designed to die. Okay, that it was never designed to be forever in the environment, that it was designed to not be able to replicate itself 100% except in these unique conditions, and the unique conditions require the rapidity from human to human and or the rapidity from human to Prevotella bacillus, right? And there's two candidate Prevotella bacillus that are involved. And in both cases, this would sort of make sense as a bioweapon. This way you could spray your bioweapon out into the planet, withdraw from it, let it do its damage, and then wait an appropriate amount of time and end up with a planet free of bioweapon and also free of those people that you wanted to have eliminated. So in that sense, it's an Illuminati, a perfectly designed Illuminati weapon if they're protected from it, right?
Also, in that same vein, during that time period, they will get everybody basically addicted to their government, reliant upon their government. Everybody has to go to the government for money to survive.
It's not going to happen, Guy. You can't. Yeah, they'll be doing that electronically, but it's only going to last a short period of time. When we get about 400 million people globally dead, okay, at that point, there won't be a social order capable of supporting the banking system, capable of supporting digital transfer of anything across even probably state lines, let alone continents, because of the people that will be dying. Okay, so what's going to happen? And look, it's just like this is the problem with their thinking. Release the bioweapon, corral all the people, do their Illuminati bad guy shit. It's not going to happen because they depend on the essential workers. Who's at risk now? The essential workers. Who will die first? The essential workers. What will happen when the essential workers die? The infrastructure collapses. The digital infrastructure, the electricity infrastructure, the food infrastructure, as we're seeing already, et cetera, et cetera. Under those circumstances, sorry, I've got a cramp here. The supporting structure for the powers that be will cease to exist. So once the banking system fails in England and it becomes intertribal chaos as the various ethnic groups start taking pot shots at each other, and then it'll escalate real quickly, and somebody will just take out all the royals just because they hate them so much, and there won't be any repercussions. Catch me if you can, that kind of thing, right? And it'll happen here as well. And we don't have a large enough military structure to prevent it from happening, especially since, like all the other essential workers, the military is going to get sick. So as a long-range plan, that doesn't make sense. That long range is in 5 years. The world will not be Mad Max, but it'll be at the level of degradation of Mad Max. We just won't associate with each other.
It would be, to me, that would be worse than Mad Max.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree with you.
Okay. So but, is there a way
out,
or what do you think the best way for us? As an individual, obviously, probably taking the healthy relatives that you have and going out into the woods, and if your objective on planet Earth is to survive this, and discounting the fact that what your soul is here to learn, maybe it is survival skills, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's, hey, getting out in the mix, fighting for, I want to fight for my country, fight for our freedoms. It might be a losing cause. It sounds like from your data that it is a losing cause. According to Dick Allgaier, it's a losing cause because the bad guys are going to take over. I don't think the bad guys will take over at the end.
I don't think the bad guys take over. No, I think Dick's wrong, but I think you're wrong as well. Okay, because getting out into the mix.
I don't think I'm wrong fighting. I'm sure I'll lose, but fighting for these principles feels right to me
Okay,
and
but let me ask this, okay? And let me just put a fine point on it. How does Bix go out and fight for freedom against a bioweapon?
I wouldn't say I'm fighting for freedom against a bioweapon. The bioweapon to me, is the destroyer. That is going to shorten our lifespan tremendously. And to me, the way I look at life these days is, what can you do in the time you have left? What is your most pressing thing that for me that I
Okay, all
want to
right.
do?
I understand what you're saying there, but also you have to take into the Taoist approach to this, okay? Because your needs and your goals um, are not dominant here,
Oh, that's true.
are not paramount, okay? And so here's the thing. Yes, you could go out, you could fight, you could go out, maybe protest, going out
Sing
and do
songs.
things, whatever. And then you get, well, singing is dangerous activity, especially around people, right?
Yep.
As we've seen from all the choir groups and stuff. But in any event, here's the thing. You can do all of that, and then you will become ill. And should you survive, you then become a burden on those people that you tried to do something for. Not only are you a potential source of infection to them, but they are going to have to take care of you until you die the next time this thing comes around and gets into you. Okay, so bear in mind this. If you get this shit, we're not talking about taking 20 years off your life, okay? We're talking about maybe your life extends out 6 years or 3 years until the very first time you need to have contact with a hospital for any reason. And at that point, you die. Okay, so if you get, bad meat 2 years from now and get a parasite, you die of that parasite. Because there's no sophisticated medical system to aid you at all. So your lifespan, because you got this, and it weakened your thinking and weakened your body and weakened your decision making 2 years out, meant that you got this year, but it cut your lifespan down to 2 years. And it's unknown. So you cannot say, just because I'm young and I've only had 30% damage to my lungs, that I'll recover. And because that recovery is predicated on the social order being there to provide all of this sophisticated shit to aid that recovery and so on. So unless we get our head wrapped around this and deal with it in an adult fashion as a bioweapon, altering our entire social order towards that effect, then the net result, in my opinion, is going to be conflicting understandings that will mean vast amounts of death, maybe to the point that the infrastructure and the social order itself is affected by merely the number of people that have died.
So what I get what you're saying, and yes, it makes sense. Unfortunately, I don't want my mind going there, but yes, it does make sense.
Right.
But at the same time, what in your mind, as far as uh, the 330 million people in the United States, just talk about our country. What is the best way forward? Is it to stay locked down until it and ultra just don't go outside? Have your food delivered for
Okay,
you.
yeah, we have to do isolation. We have to. There's no question about it because it's a bioweapon. It is not a disease. No amount of coming back will ever do anything other than create another bloom of the disease, another bloom of damage to 80% of the people that will get it, and another bloom of death to those 20% that will perish that episode. This is a bioweapon. It's not a disease. We cannot think of it that way. So every time you come out, so it may be that for a number of years, we have to provide the local telephone worker, the local plumber with a closed environment suit to go and do their jobs. Okay, it may come to that, and it may be that we have to elevate to. Well, I know that right now we're in the process of doing a Japanese inversion of the Meiji era. Okay, so right now, the most important people in our social order here in the continent of North America are farmers. But most people have yet to recognize that. The second most important people are the distributors, but most people are just barely starting to recognize some of that. The third most important people are all the people that provide service on the existing infrastructure and keep it limping along, because we're not going to be able to replace it. You can forget about any kind of infrastructure rebuild when we can't have construction workers getting close to each other, when we can't fire up factories because people are going to start keeling over, because this is a bioweapon. Now, there are ways to approach it, but if we're going to do that, so if I were in charge, I would set about doing something absolutely radical, which would be a free and open source of science, in the sense that I would have scientific experiments run, and I would provide all of the data without editing on the internet to let every single wacko mind out there have a look at the data to see if there's anything that suggests
The real data.
The real data, correct. Okay. And the first thing I would do would be to investigate all of those areas that are deliberately ignored by academia and deliberately ignored because of ignorance by allopathic medicine. So I would have people examining optimal vitamin individuals, their blood exposure to this, all of that kind of thing. I would be examining all the herbal medicines that are complicated compound construction like chaga, okay? Because allopathic medicine is a reduction thinking. So they find that chaga keeps somebody healthy. They go and look at chaga for the one element that they can take out of there to give you in a concentrated titrated dose, correct? And so, but what they fail to understand is that for complex humans like ourselves, it is not ever that single element, and the extraction of that single element not only weakens its effect on the whole body, but can cause negative effects because you're taking it out of the complex mixture. And so I would examine these things from an entirely different viewpoint, and I would put the academic and the allopathic world on notice that you people are not fucking experts. And you need to really understand how much not experts you are, because otherwise you're going to keep dying very rapidly. And even though you're not experts on this, you can set bones, and we need you to fix teeth.
So, okay, so it's not all hope is lost as far, I mean, basically you're saying unless we can figure out a way to either kill the bioweapon or change the spread of the bioweapon or do something to the bioweapon such that we don't have to die off in 5 years.
It's possible that we have a way out, okay? I have to plan as though we won't take that way out.
Right.
And so that makes me a bit pessimistic at times, right? Just because I want to keep as many of the people I know alive, and that may be assuming, like The Big Short, that I need to, short against the movement way. All right. So in that sense, in analysis. However, here's the deal. There is a way out. The effective way out is obviously to reduce. Okay, so if it is true that there is a built-in timer, or if it is true within the virus that it dies off after a certain number of days, or if it is true that the nature of the giant construction in RNA that is this engineered bioweapon is necessarily unstable in and of itself and will degrade over time anyway. So whether they plan to degrade it or whether it's a side effect of the fact that they made it so big is neither here nor there. If it is indeed degrading, then we could take the strategy of reducing down below R1. All right. So and we can do that by a combination of hardening, isolation, and protective equipment. But we're not doing any of the hardening right now. We're only doing the isolation and only marginally doing protective equipment. Mm-hmm. But if we saw that was the case, if we actually did a study and let the stuff, I don't know how they would design the study, but if we just let the stuff sit there and degrade, and we discover that, it can't replicate beyond, say, 100 days out in the wild, it can't survive 100 days unless it's transmitted through a human via Prevotella or through the human flesh, then we've got a shot there, literally making it go away in something under 5 months, probably, once we achieved a certain state.
But that would be, literally, that would be full lockdown where nobody goes out.
No, that wouldn't be the strategy at all, okay? You would lock down everybody who is inherently vulnerable and who would also potentially be carrier. All right. So you would still lock down schools because kids are not inherently vulnerable to it, although they will suffer damage, but they're carriers. But see, here's the thing. You would also at that same time massively harden people, which I am convinced fights it off. But this is everything I see. Yeah, exactly. Okay, and I've got chaga in my coffee here, which gets me all wound up in the morning, right? But here's the thing about this. The more I see the scientists coming on out, I see language that convinces me I'm 100% correct about the hardening process, because you'll see language in there where they, for one thing, where a doctor will say, blah, 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 blah. Humanity has never seen anything like this disease ever at all. Okay, and novel diseases don't arise. In this case, we know that's true because we made this one. But you'll see other things in there that talk about, like there was a big New York Times article the other day about how one doctor discovered that as soon as anybody presents and they even think they've got COVID, they should slam them with anti-pneumonia drugs right away, even though they may not be presenting with a single pneumonia symptom, because they already have it, and it's what's called silent hypoxia. And that's probably what killed our friend here, okay, was that he didn't know his lungs had been damaged to that point. And what happens is your lungs are so damaged in their ability to transfer the oxygen and the carbon dioxide that the heart builds up pressure trying to shove enough blood through the lungs in order to get oxygenation and carbon dioxide transfer to occur. And it basically overpressurizes the heart, and that's why you have a heart attack, especially since the heart has already been damaged in the same process as the lungs. Now, if we harden ourselves, I'm quite convinced that this, because it works at a macro level within the medical institutions to just slam the hell out of this for people. So those people that entered into the hospital in New York that was initially doing high levels of vitamin C, and even then those were very low levels in my opinion, but even then that's significantly statistically altered the mortality rate for those individuals involved, no matter what their age. Mm-hmm. Okay, so even if you're 70 or 80 years old, getting lots and lots and lots of vitamin C shoved in you as soon as you present any symptoms at all alters the outcome from that point forward significantly.
Do you still, if you harden yourself, are you still a carrier? Does it just protect you, but are you still a carrier?
No. Here's the thing. Let's go back to a previous discussion, okay? So because we left off the other half of it here, and we need to continue. So I said there were two possible things that were occurring. Either the virus was degrading into multiple shorter forms that we could think of as different strains, and that's why it appeared to be more lethal, right? Or what may be a better metaphor, a better understanding, is that it's viral load. So some people get massively ill because not because the strain is more lethal or more damaging, but because the strain is more sneaky, if you want to think of it that way. All right? So you get a larger viral load in you before it overwhelms you. And so this disease is not like, or this bioweapon is not like a disease. So in a disease, if you were to go and you're out singing, you get a big lung full of flu, influenza stuff, right? It's going to try and attack you right away. You'll feel that little scratchiness, itchiness in the throat.
We've all felt, I feel a cold coming on.
Exactly so. Exactly so. Okay. Here you don't have that. Okay, because the virus does that, and when that occurs, when you feel the cold coming on, a little bit of the virus has gotten onto you and is attempting to infiltrate your cells. And it doesn't happen that way with this particular virus because of what they discovered, because of the nature of how it reacts within the bats. It actually waits until there's a viral mass of sufficient size, and then all of it attacks you at once.
It waits for the army to build up and then attack.
You got it. So you could maybe acquire the virus over several days of exposure. And then it gets a viral load and attacks you, as opposed to the starting to attack you the very first day a little bit of it gets in you. It just sort of seems to just hang around, and that's the way it does in the bats. And so the video I did about the discovery in the bat shit is of active fresh vitamin C there, as well as in drippings from bat saliva, give us the clue here as to how the bats manage the viral load. So either it's a case of there's more lethal strains, or it's a case of it's simply a matter of how you accumulate viral load relative to your body. Okay, and so since this thing attacks vitamin C, if you've only got X amount of vitamin C, as the initial virus gets into you, it doesn't really try and penetrate you so much as it keeps sampling you for vitamin C, and then once it gets below a certain level, then it launches. And so if you've only got a certain amount of vitamin C and you're not supplementing that daily, that virus can get out of hand. If, on the other hand, you have vitamin C beyond its ability to deal with, it apparently dies within mere hours. And so this is the effect of following the chaga and the vitamin C routine. Those people, so we've got people out of France, out of Belgium, out of Holland, Finland, all over Europe, Canada, and China that followed this approach when they had it and had very severe cases of this stuff. Okay, so the guy in France was a perfect example. He almost went to the hospital twice. He was desperately afraid to go, so he told his girlfriend, no matter what, unless that I'm dying right then and there, don't even think about it. Let me tough it out. And he had 3 very bad days. But this was a guy that had had an episode of it maybe a month earlier. So he was getting it for the second time. And it really took him down. And he got out of those 3 bad days, although he still has lung issues. It's a month further on. He's got to repair and rebuild his body. But the 3 days was short. It was shortened to 3 days because of the massive amounts of vitamin C, chaga, etc. And what is the real telling key here was that halfway through that, he thought he was about ready to go to the hospital and stuff. And his girlfriend said, oh my God, this ascorbic acid is over 6 months old. And so it had passed its pull date. It was 6 months past its pull date. And so it was degraded down to who knows how much he was actually absorbing, right? And so 1.5 days into it, she was able to go on out and get him massive amounts of liposomal, and he started taking liposomal, and he said almost instantly the bounce back came back, and he was no longer afraid of dying. So
now liposomal, as far as I understand it, is was it mixed with like a fat that
correct,
that
a lecithin, correct. It takes
so
it right
how much
to the
more do you absorb as opposed to normal vitamin C?
At least 4 times, maybe 5 times more.
Okay.
So ordinary vitamin C, you're going to get 20% if you're a healthy individual. There's things that it's odd because the more unhealthy you are, the more vitamin C you will absorb up to a certain point, right? Than yourself in a more healthy condition. But you really need optimal vitamins all the way around. You need to have the E and the D in you to get optimal absorption for vitamin C. But given all of that, it's a difference between 80% versus 20% absorption. And so she bombed it, at that point. Now he'd been in it a day and a half and was seriously suffering. And, she was the one that had sent me emails saying, there's this gray sweat coming out of him. What do I do? And, because he had fevers, he was, unresponsive and so on. So it was just it was very difficult for her, but they both came through it fine. And there have been a number of people that reported symptoms to me and all of this. And the earlier you get to it and the more you bomb it with C and chaga. Now, there was one guy who said the chaga felt very, very, very heavy on him. And he described it. He was very articulate and described quite well what he was going through. And he said that the chaga, while it felt heavy, he's also quite certain he could not have survived without it. This was a guy, I think it was in Holland. And he said that, he actually knew that on the end of the 3rd day when he had that a dose of chaga that evening, that he was getting better because he did not have the heaviness. So I think what he was describing as heaviness was actually the antiviral coming on out from the chaga and contending with the virus inside his body in the way that other people have described as a strange form of heat. spot heat, they called it, right? So their lungs would get hot. And then later on, maybe their kidney would get hot, and it would sort of float throughout their body. And I'm quite convinced that this is the chaga itself dealing with the virus in those parts of the body where it's encountered. And apparently now the guy in Holland is a big fellow. He was 150 kilos, so something over 300 pounds, right? And so he was drinking almost bottles of chaga extract because, we did not know. So, we think maybe 2 mils every hour, but it's going to depend on body mass. And he didn't feel anything, but he said once he got about half a bottle in him, he said then he started feeling the heaviness and so on. And so he knew something was going on.
Yeah.
And he was by himself. He had no one to take him to the hospital. So he was very worried.
So to me, it sounds like from your research, if say you got up on the podium with Trump and all in his daily meeting and you screamed to the world, hey, you need to load up on your liposomal vitamin C, you need to load up on chaga, you need to load up on all these other things, these vitamins, for us to even have a whiff of a chance to beat this thing.
And you need to wear a mask constantly.
Yes.
Masks are not a sign of servitude or any of this other horse shit. And we see these people saying that kind of crap, they're just going to die.
And amazingly, in California, everybody's wearing masks now, which is great.
Right. Well, let's stop real quick. The Czech Republic and Croatia are two of the leaders, and the Mongolian Republic are the three leaders on the planet in dealing with this. Okay, and within the first few days, the Czech Republic closed their borders against the EU's wishes, and they instituted a 10 days policy. And they said the government said in 10 days, everyone in the republic will wear masks constantly, even though we don't have them. So if you don't have them, you better start making them. And if you can make them, start handing them out. Mm-hmm. And in less than 10 days, the entire population was wearing masks. So, and it made a difference. And then Croatia saw that, and they instituted the same policy. Mongolia had done it on their own. Now, Mongolia has the advantage of being really rural. So, separation is a serious issue anyway, constantly.
Right. So, for me, I'm like, okay, what can I do? I've been screaming about vitamin C. I've been screaming about chaga. I have all my family and friends are doing it. They aren't exactly sure why. I've tried to explain it. They aren't exactly sure why, but they believe it now more than they did a month ago when I was screaming it. I mean, it's to me, I think it's time to start screaming at everybody who hears this. Should be screaming.
I tried that, and I got the shit kicked out of me on social media. Okay, so
now do you hang on? Do you see that like YouTube and Twitter and stuff are blocking those types of posts about vitamin C and chaga?
Yeah, they've even announced that. YouTube has announced that because that if it's not sanctioned by the Communist Party of China by way of the WHO, they won't allow you to say this.
See, that's insane.
I know, and Twitter took me off total.
Yeah.
They said, no, you violated our terms of service by pissing off the CCP. You're gone.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I'm not doing anything with Twitter. There's no point for me screaming anymore. My ability to scream is difficult because being a woo-woo personality, imagine what it would take for officialdom to have to wrap their head around and repeat the kind of words I'm using.
True. Although Trump will say anything. And
True. Yeah, true. No, the guy's got guts. There's no question. And he may even have some understanding of what's going on. And the real problem is I've always maintained, and the reason I wanted to get everybody to think about this as a bioweapon from get-go was that the real problem is that if you say bioweapon word, you'd better have antidote word in there as well,
right?
Or at least path to an antidote. Because now what they're doing is they're saying vaccine, 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 as though A, it could exist, and B, it's the antidote.
Yeah.
And there won't be a vaccine because bioweapons are designed not to be able to be engineered against.
That's the whole idea.
Correct.
Okay.
And this is an interesting one. Okay, this is a very interesting situation. I'm quite sure that people like myself will survive and will come out of this. And my issue at this point is, what kind of a world do I walk around in for the rest of my life, basically starting from a couple of years from now, right? And and I would like to be able to alter the nature of that world and to make it more harmonious to me being an old guy, because I don't want to have to live in a world where I'm 80 years old and I got to get out and get that elk to be able to survive, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the path we're on at this moment. But it's possible to change it. But my ability to influence that shift and change is extremely limited, at least in terms of being, a face and yelling and, better pay attention and stuff, right? I think they understand it's a bioweapon, but I don't think that they understand there actually is a key and a pathway to an antidote. And you can even explain that even absent an antidote, we have non-pharmaceutical intervention techniques that will allow us to kill it. We think, because it does appear that it has a degradation factor, whether that was designed in or not. Okay, so now let's point out a few things here. I was right before everybody else was right. So I've been saying about this thing since September that we were going to face this shit. And this is truly year zero. And everything we do now affects whether there's a year one. And my understanding of this as a bioweapon was fixed in early December. I knew then. And I've never wavered in saying it's a bioweapon. And ever since then, everything that's come out has stacked up in favor of it being a bioweapon, including now being able to lay out all the personalities involved, the labs, the routes, the carriers, etc. And George Webb has just done marvelous work on that. So you can get the whole history of it by just going and listening to his talk about it, except they're taking him off YouTube. Anyway, so that being the case, I'm willing to bet, and in fact, am betting my and my wife's life on my understanding of this as a bioweapon going forward. And so my understanding of this as a bioweapon is such that I do think that the reports of the degradation of it are accurate. And it would make sense from both the size of the construction of the RNA package, the delivery package of the bioweapon being so damn large, and not being able to have an exact replication, self-integrity kind of a copy check on it. I think the degradation does exist. So even without pharmaceutical intervention of any kind, we should be able to devise a strategy that would allow the virus to simply degrade to the point where we don't have to worry about it. And I find this to be extremely optimistic, because I was afraid that I was going to have to be both 80 years old trying to get elk to survive, and still at that point, 20 plus years from now, be paranoid of having another human around me simply because they may be infected, right? Now, if we know that if we can drop below the R1 value, and then we see that, 4 or 5 months later, there is no reoccurrence no matter what, then we can end all the isolation and stuff once we know that this is the case. But it'll probably, just in 1918, it'll probably take that additional year. Mm-hmm. So in 1918, the epidemic went from 1918 through 1920, 2 years complete, but people didn't come back and associate with each other until almost 1922. And so almost 18 months later, really, for the majority of people. And that's what led to the Roaring '20s. If we were going to have such a situation now, then that would be 2025 that we would start coming out.
So, okay, you had sent me an email, and you had wanted to talk about the future, and this is something I do want to talk to you about also. The ET, what other extraterrestrial beings, their influence on us now, can they come and save us? Number one. And number two, what is your take going forward with, I mean, I've had some amazing experiences with the goggles, but both also with seeing things hurling towards Earth that were deflected, blown up in the middle of the night and shot off in different directions. Clearly there's higher technologies protecting the planet, or attacking the planet. What's your take on
You have
ET
to
and us
be
going
careful
forward?
about that, though, Biggs, in terms of interpretation. Anything that, okay, so um, mostly people don't understand, but I use a kind of thinking that's called retroduction, also called abduction. And it's the kind of thinking that cops use and investigators use, where you um, look backward in order to lead. Okay, so in this case, if we're looking at something hurling towards the planet and we actually see with our night vision goggles a beam come from somewhere and push it away or blow it up or deflect it, we cannot make the assumption safely that that was in any way intended to aid the planet or aid humanity. Okay, this humanity centrist thinking is really absurd. It's like the bacteria inside the petri dish thinking that the heat being supplied to the petri dish is there to aid its desires and not the people conducting the experiment. So maybe the people that conduct the experiment simply didn't want it to be interrupted at that point by something hurling in. Or even more prosaic, maybe there are other forces here that are, this is the common theme and all the woo-woo guys of, reptilians versus Pleiadians versus Andromedans and all that horse shit, right? And so maybe what you're seeing is simply two contending groups, neither one of which give a shit about us, all right? Mm-hmm. So I've never met any aliens in corporeal reality. Okay, I have met aliens in hyperspace through intense journeys with psychedelics. And I'm convinced because of the nature of the schizophrenic mind, or schizotypical in my opinion, or in my case, that my journeys are different than other people's experience with psychedelics. But that aside, I've taken my shamanic levels, and there have been some times I've dealt with these insectolins or these mantids. They don't really look like a mantis, but they give you the impression of being an exoskeleton-covered insect, right? And they don't care as much about us as I care about the paramecium that's on my skin. All right, so no, there's not going to be any space aliens that are going to come and save us from this, and demonstrably so, because it's here, it's ravaging the planet now. And so what are they going to do? Wait until 1.5 million or 1.5 billion people have died and then save us? And if so, why? Why not do it now? Or are they going to wait until there's only 20,000 breeding pairs left and save us? If so, I know why. Because they want to reboot the experiment. Mm-hmm. We have to ask ourselves, what happened to the 108 other versions of humans that have been on this planet? Neanderthal were some of the last, but every single one of these subspecies of humans no longer exist. And you can have the Darwinian theory that, we Homo sapiens sapiens beat the shit out of them and ate them, and we killed them off, or we bred them out of existence. And I don't buy that. I think that the whoever is running the experiment, of which we are the bacteria in the petri dish, wiped out all the other bacteria because it was getting us closer and closer and closer, or getting closer and closer to the strain it wanted, just as we do with bacteria in petri dishes. So you get a petri dish, you come on in and you take your little sterilized wand, you get your sample and you do your lace, your hash on the petri dish, you seal it up, you put it in the incubator, you tag it and give it the light and the conditions it needs, and it grows stuff. Then you come on in and you isolate that into what visibly is clusters of various different types. And you purify by taking each of those types out, blenderizing them, putting them through the same process on their own petri dish. That's what happened to us, in my opinion. Okay? Neanderthal was wiped out because they didn't suit the needs of whoever is running the experiment. Well, if you look at it that way, if one were to have an entirely woo-woo perspective on it, then the bioweapon is here to do exactly that, to scrub the petri dish without damaging the petri dish, right? And it's here to get rid of us all. And the reason it will is because it's so well designed, and it was designed by space aliens who quite actually put the mechanism and thought and ideas into specific human heads that it should come out this way. And that if that were the case, then I would ask you to become really serious about isolation and self-protection because you're fighting insects and their release of a bioweapon. And then 4 or 5 years after 90% of humanity has died because of the process of the bioweapon and what will happen to it, then you and I can come on out and we can do battle with the invading space aliens.
I watched a movie recently called Jupiter Ascending. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It talks about.
No, I don't usually watch a lot of the CGI
I
movies,
know and I don't either. But I mean, conceptually, it was about a superior, shall we say, superior race that was harvesting the planet from, I don't know if it's adrenochrome or whatever it is they were harvesting, and in the end, I liked it because free will overdid the alien agenda. Let's talk briefly about, or not briefly, about our souls and the reason we came here. Do you think that we came here to live out what we're going through right now? This is one of the challenges we wanted to experience.
Sure. That's obvious, but it has nothing to do with our souls. Okay, everybody misunderstands this. Your soul has no thought; it's not conscious. All right, it's a servant. It's like a Roomba. All right, you're not going to worry about the thinking or the processes of the Roomba. You're just going to take it with you from house to house to house to clean every house you're in. And so that's what your soul is. It's the Roomba that forms your body for you and makes the prototypical body that is in the woman's womb shape by putting its template around that protoplasm. And that's why Bix ends up looking like Bix life after life after life after life. But yeah, the consciousness is here on in my opinion, is here on a journey of individuation. Okay, so it is not like most of these woo-woo people and most of the ascended, I smoke ascended masters kind of guys, because there is no goal towards grand unification, towards groupthink, towards community. In fact, the intense separation that people feel, that the psychiatrist would label as the formation of, ego defenses and id parameters and all kinds of other psychological constraints, is indeed a manifestation in the human of a past experience of our separation from a greater mass as we work our way towards individuation. So you could think of it as this way, that this is crude and it'll give people sort of a wrong understanding, but as a school of fish are individual units, but they all move in concert. And as the same occurs with birds and insects like ants and so on, we humans, in our evolutionary growth to who we are as humans, experience such collective group states. And we bring with us as humans a longing for the enveloping feeling of safety and surety of those group states. It's rough to be a human. It's rough to stand naked and alone in front of universe, right? It's very scary. But this is where it's where in each and every one of our evolutions, in each and every one of our lives is, and I agree with you that we are here to experience just what we're to experience now. Because it's going to, there's, okay, so in the normal course of what we think of as our lives, here, at least here in the West, in the Western liberal democracies, there's a tendency to think of ourselves as protected, as being entitled to things. And you're going along just fine, and then something happens, a car wreck or something, and instantly that illusion is shattered, and you're thrown into body mind. And all you can think of is the fear, the pain, the heart pounding, the sweat coming out of you. You cannot get yourself out of that state because your body mind has taken over all of your conceptual consciousness channels, so to speak, right? But it shows you what the illusionary nature of the reality around you is. And so it puts you back into the real, which is that you're always only one breath, one heartbeat away from extinction, from death. But there's nothing like the circumstances we're in now to present challenge to individuals and thus, by extension, to all of the collectives that those individuals belong in. So this is the way I'm looking at this. And this is why I've been going at it so hard ever since December, was that this is the ultimate challenge in this body's life.
Right.
And I'm not going to leave a hair's width possibility that I'm not going to do 100% of my best in this challenge, because I want that experience in my next life. I want to go into my next life having totally exhausted my my key in this particular instance, right? And because when you're in war, when you're in a battle situation, there is only one outcome. You cannot allow yourself to think of anything other than that one outcome, which is victory, and at all costs. And so that's what I'm into this for, is victory at all costs. And it's a fucking bioweapon. I don't care if the Chinese did it. I don't think they did it. I don't care if the guys at Fort Detrick think they did it. You know, I'm a woo-woo guy, and I sure as fuck know the insects are involved, because I talked with those fuckers, or I talked at them, all those decades ago. And see, that's one of the reasons that I won't be an effective mouthpiece for this. That, they're going to need somebody that the academics will pay attention to, or maybe not. Maybe it will actually come down to that situation that was seen in the data, where we get into summer, and there's such a huge crash, such a huge degradation across the species, and across the globe, around the globe, that desperation forces people into the woo-woo camp, and then early success in the woo-woo camp emboldens further exploration of it. That was the optimistic message in the data. And that was such that it said that this would happen in like summer, so past June, and that by the time we got into fall, the early success in understanding, I don't know what level, would promote the powers that be in those roles at that time to be desperate and start hauling this shit out of the deep projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, I've been screaming about that for a while. Is that, obviously we need help. We need help, not help from releasing the past information. Not only the technology that has been hidden from us, but the history that has been hidden from us. And a lot of that has happened. Our daughter is living with us now, and literally I've been screaming about this stuff for years. And she's like, yeah, what does Biggs do again? My wife's like, well, it's kind of got to do with the economy and some conspiracy. And now she's all like, oh my God, she's knee deep in the middle of it. And
Right.
and her generation, they are waking up to this stuff. They have a foot in the lefty camp, and then a foot in now they're getting their foot into the conspiracy world and connecting the dots for all these conspiracies and what that'll do. I hope it opens up a lot of the secrets that have been hidden from us, because I think that'll help us a lot, both the technology side of it and put a better perspective on where humanity has been in the past.
This is interesting. I mean, that aspect of it alone, because look at how many times in the data we would have them, about the looting of the Vatican Library and everything coming out, and about the holes in Maryland. Fort Detrick. I wonder where Fort Detrick is located. And, all of this stuff coming out. And it came out at a period of time when the institutions were too weak to do anything to prevent the populace from having its will. Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting there, right? So a very interesting description. Now that we're here, we get a lot greater understanding of what that shit was actually alluding to way back when, right? And it actually has helped me in some of my thinking about how the knowledge transmits itself through time and gets us ready for these kind of things. But this is exactly going to your question. It's not about our souls, it's about our consciousness. But, consciousness is not temporally bound. So your consciousness now knows everything that will happen to you the rest of your life. But because of the nature of your body, it's not wise that your consciousness share that with itself, so to speak, right?
What would
And
be the purpose unless you want to
correct,
experience it and see where you can go with it, and
correct.
deal with karma stuff and things like that.
Correct, exactly so. And it's a mechanistic, but it's complex and self-healing in terms of the universe and karma. And so, in that sense, I find it to be a positive form of a system or a mechanism, and one I willingly cooperate with. But it's just interesting about the nature of how information flows, and how all it takes is a change in your mind in order that your world can actually change.
Mm-hmm.
And so look at all the people that were just there one day and then they heard Bitcoin, 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 and they changed and their world changed from that point on.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're at a position where we need to be saying bioweapon, bioweapon, bioweapon. And yes, there is fear here, risk, and so on, but it's my thinking that it's ever so much better to be facing a bioweapon of this complexity, this nastiness, than a natural disease that arose in a novel fashion, okay, that meets these criteria. So, in other words, retroductively, I can say that there's never been a disease on this planet that naturally arose that fits anywhere close to these criteria. And so such novelty does not exist and has never existed on the planet in the human universe. All right. So all of the time the humans have been around, such novelty does not exist. Mm-hmm. In other words, we get novel diseases. You may stumble on in and get bit by a bat and end up with Nipah, and you give Nipah to your wife. But Nipah existed as it was within the bat community and was just there waiting for us to run across. This situation we have right here has never existed before because we've created it. But it was obviously a necessary, this is obviously a necessary part of the evolution of the collective whole of humanity, as well as the individual humans and their expression of life and experience across their multiple lives. Okay, so in other words, as humans, individuals, we are going to learn from this whether we die from it or not, right? But also, our species is being presented with a challenge. And if we look at it one way, this may be one of the reasons that the Fermi paradox exists. In other words, all of the space aliens and all of infinite creation, maybe many, many, many of them run into a situation where they kill their species off the first time they fuck around with making biological materials. And so maybe that is a huge limiting factor in all of universe to prevent the spread of stupid space aliens outside of their own planet. Mm. And our question is, will we be stupid or not? Will we overcome this? And we won't overcome this, in my opinion, if we think of this as a disease. So if 2 years from now you've still got people saying, oh, it's just the flu, or it's a regular disease, then we're doomed. And so you can look at the language and say 2 years from now, if that's the case, if officialdom is not dealing with it as a bioweapon, if our social order has not altered itself to deal with the fact that a bioweapon has been released, then the social order itself, that civilization, is doomed, and you should take appropriate measures to isolate yourself and let it keel over those last 3 years, and then come on out and rebuild something else.
I don't know if I should feel good after this discussion or feel bad or just say it is what it is.
It is. Yeah.
I feel better.
Part.
I feel better knowing it, and it does make sense. I tend to lean towards the happier, not happier just to be happy, but what are the outcomes that what are the best outcomes? Can humanity get their head around? The biggest thing for me is, one of the biggest things is all the disinformation, misinformation, and this goes back to the financial system, the lack of truth, the lack of honesty in our society, in our controllers and our rulers. I mean, all of it the bioweapon would be something I think we could deal with if we break out of listening to them.
I agree with you. And that's the exact expression that I'm fighting so continuously these last few months has been the CCP and Communist Party of China and its ability to use Western social media to shadow ban, to take my videos away, et cetera, et cetera. Because I was just going to keep saying bioweapon, 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 bioweapon until it's sunk in, right? Well, apparently they don't want me to do that, and that there's a movement against it. But I do understand, Bix, that what you're quite correct, that it is the delusion and the delusion of disinformation and the delusion of deliberate lies that prevent us from reacting appropriately to this, and have prevented us from reacting appropriately to this since back in January. And so we do need to get around that delusionary state within the media and stuff. I've got an idea. Okay, and I'm working on this idea, and I'm even willing to put some money behind the idea. And the idea is potentially a way to get the information out into people's minds in a manner that won't be able to be easily undone by the powers that be within the social media. This idea is going to involve me hiring an actor. It's going to involve me doing specific things. So it may take a while. It'd be better if I could do it rapidly. And I actually even went so far as to ask the Edge of Wonder boys if they wanted to participate in this, because there's benefit.
Wow.
For
That's a real jump for you.
That's a huge jump, right? But I'm cognizant of their skills and connections they have, and how they could benefit from it, as well as being in a situation where I don't really give a shit about the ego aspect of it, right? In terms of it doesn't have to come out from me. This thing has to be done a particular way in order to have a particular impact. But if it does get this impact, my idea would probably go viral on its own and would be almost impossible for the powers that be to squelch, and would alter the nature of the conversation around this at such a huge level that officialdom would have to acknowledge the existence of it. So basically what I'm saying is, if we were to look at populist movements, and we look at whether or not officialdom deals with populist movements and so on, and is aware of them and so on, we see that there's a seeming support for Q shit from upper echelons. So I can build something in 6 minutes time that, if everything goes together and we pull it together and get this thing created, after watching it in 6 minutes, enough people watching it would create a movement that would be larger than Q, much more rapid in terms of its effect, and officialdom would have to address it. And at the core of it would be that, we're dealing with a bioweapon.
I mean, if I can help at all, I would.
Oh, sure,
love to.
sure. Yeah,
And,
no, it's. I know
we
it's
know a lot of people.
Yeah, I need an actor. I need certain.
What about an avatar?
No, it's got to be a human. Okay, we actually need a very skilled face, because what I'm after is a soliloquy. Okay.
I know a news broadcaster who's very respected, but nobody knows where he lives now. He used to live in Hawaii.
That's yeah, but he's a broadcaster, okay?
Yeah.
So I need somebody that is that it truly has acting skills. I'm not an actor, right? What you see is, I'm WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Mm-hmm. So the idea of being able to force an emotion out of my face, it's like that line. Well, an actor is all about sincerity. Once they can fake that, they can fake anything. And so it's like, it's like I never wrap my head around how that would be done. But anyway, I need such a person as that. And I've got a script that will, and see, here's the hell of it is that I don't want to go into it because it may not ever really happen, but I need to keep it somewhat reserved if I can. But it would scare the absolute hell out of people. It would be using fear as a motivator, like it would be our times, this particular time in history. It would be our collective global version of 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast.
Wow, that would be cool. I know some actors and actresses, so let's continue this conversation.
Sure, sure.
Okay. Is there anything else? I mean, we've been going for well
No,
over an
no.
hour now.
No, I got to get coffee and I got to see how things are in the house and
Okay.
that sort of thing. So, basically I wanted to say it's all great to think about the economy, but the economy is not the issue, right? Until we grapple with this as a bioweapon, everything else is basically extraneous. And every time you react to the economy, you're just going to cause the bioweapon greater impact on the social order unless you do it correctly.
Okay. We got a lot of work to do going forward. Thank you, Cliff, for spending the time with us. And anytime you want to reach out, you know where to find me.
Yeah, let's see if we can get it posted.